Everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our training webinar series by experts. So today we have Anne Zollars. She's a PT, DPT, MA, and she treats children and adults in her private practice in the US and integrating manual therapy, neurodevelopment treatment, and seating mobility. She's also the author of Special Seating and Illustrated Guides, second edition, published in 2010, and has worked and taught in this field at the Rehabilitation Engineering Center at Packard Children's Hospital at Stanford and in New Mexico, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Canada, Ireland, England, Russia, Malaysia, and Mexico. We are so happy to welcome you, Anne. I will now hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Krithika. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to see everybody today. See if I get my camera a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show my PowerPoint. And if you have questions throughout, go ahead and put it in the chat. I'll see if I can keep up with you. Okay. Can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to be talking about are 5 common seating problems and possible solutions. And you'll see where I'm going with this. I'm going to be utilizing the basic and the intermediate World Health Organization package and adding a little bit of my own stuff. And so I'm happy to take any questions and help you guys out in any way you need to in terms of seating. So first off is that all the illustrations are coming in this presentation from my book, which is, can you see my pointer by any chance? Or not so much? Krithika, can you see my pointer? No?
No.
Okay, I'm not going to.
Yes, yes, we do see it, yes.
Okay, okay. So the book that I wrote is Special Seating and Illustrated Guide. I did that a number of years ago because when I became a physical therapist in the United States, it was hard to figure out how to do seating. So there's a lot more resources now, and I wanted to make something that was very clear for people for basic as well as complex seating. So that is, a lot of the illustrations are from that, and also from Seating and Wheeled Mobility, a clinical resource guide by Jeannie Minkle and Michelle Lang, and the World Health Organization training package. And there's actually another one down here, Kelly Waugh and Barb Crane, a clinical application guide to standardized wheelchair seating measures of the body and support services. So those are where some of the resources that we're using. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be focusing on this particular posture. And this particular posture is the posterior pelvic tilt. And the posterior pelvic tilt is kind of interesting because, let me see. We can have a lot of different aspects and causes of this kind of posterior tilt. It can be slouching, it can be sliding, it can be extending. So trying to decipher what's going on, why is that person in that posterior pelvic tilt and forward rounded position? So the first thing, I'm an instructor. And so what I like to do is make sure that we're all on the same page as we're going through this. So we're going to go through some basic principles, and one is, what is the upright reference neutral posture, which I'm sure you all know, but we're going to go through it anyway, because there's a difference between the reference neutral posture and the person's neutral posture, and I'm going to just kind of go through that a little bit. So we know that in the reference neutral posture, the person is upright. Their head is upright, their trunk is upright, their back follows these curves. The pelvis is upright or a little bit tilted forward or anteriorly. The knees, the hips and knees and ankles are at least at 90 degrees, and things are upright in the upright position. The trunk and the pelvis and the hips are a little bit separated. So this is kind of how we are referencing from our neutral posture. Now, what is a person's neutral posture? So the person's neutral posture is not just that reference point. We're not all set in stone. We all are very different. So it's where that person feels aligned and well balanced and stable. And it is a home base, a place to come back to between the extremes of movement. And it's relaxed, it's ready for function, and it's not a collapsed position. So it might be a little bit different from this reference neutral. And this is what we're trying to get to with people, something that is comfortable and functional for them. So we want to know that our seating system is going to be supporting the person in his or her neutral posture, not just the reference posture, right? And that that person has postural or options so they can function. So they're just not stuck in one place. So we're just going to look a little bit at the pelvis, just to kind of clarify. And I have my pelvis here too. Just fine. So first of all, what I want you guys to do is put your hands on top of, and I have my pelvis. We'll see if we can see it. Okay, so the pelvis. So put your hands on your hips so that your hands are like this over top of your own iliac crest, the iliac crest. Okay, the iliac crest goes from the ASIS, the anterior superior iliac spine, all the way to the posterior superior iliac spine. If we turn around, you can see that's at the top of the sacrum. So we are referencing, we're using the anterior and posterior superior iliac spine to be able to figure out what our pelvis is doing. So let's just do this. I'll do it also. Find your own ASIS. I wish I could be in person with y'all so we could help out with all this. And your PSIS is going to be with your thumbs. So you're going to have your index finger on your ASIS, your PSIS is on your thumbs. Now feel where if you move your pelvis back and forth, so your whole body is going to be moving when you do this, can you bring your pelvis into a reference neutral, meaning that either that PSIS is in alignment with the ASIS or it's slightly above. That's reference neutral, but that might not be where you're most comfortable. So now what I want you to do is I want you to say, okay, well, that's where I have the flexibility, but then where am I comfortable? It might be in a little bit of posterior tilt. It might be in a little bit of an anterior tilt. It might be a little bit tilted to the side. I want to differentiate this because it's really important that we are able to know the flexibility, but also how practical that flexibility is for people when we're assessing them. Are there any questions about that? So when we're going through, yep, go ahead.
No, I said it's no, it's clear.
What's that?
No, you asked any question. I said it is no at this moment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So as we go along, first when we're looking at somebody and we're talking about we're looking at somebody's posture. First, we're looking at that in the wheelchair or the chair. And then we're going to be looking at their balance and postural support on either a mat, a table, or a bed. And then we look at the mat assessment, looking and checking their flexibility, lying on their back. And then we go into hand simulation. So I think everybody is familiar with all of this, but we're just going to go through some of these with the posterior pelvic tilt in mind. Okay, I'm just going to see if there's, let's see. Okay. So first, what is a posture in the wheelchair? So if we look at everything, they could be in a posterior pelvic tilt. So we're going to focus on the pelvis. So we just have a focus here. A posterior pelvic tilt. They could be stiffening and sliding forward, more of an extensor kind of thrust. They could be rolled forward. That's more of an anterior pelvic tilt. They could be tilted to the side. They could be turned and rotated. And sometimes you have a combination. This is a picture from the top of a rotation. Are we all good with that? So kind of looking, we have to look at their whole posture, but right now we're just going to focus on the pelvis because it's a lot, even just looking at this particular issue. So again, we're going to focus on the issue of the posterior pelvic tilt. So the step 2 is what kind of sitting balance do they have? And you guys all, and I know this is all something you do, but let's just go through the steps. So we know that if they're a hands-free sitter, they have good control and balance, and they're the basic wheelchair user, the one that we use the basic package for. If they're a hands-dependent sitter, they have fair balance and trunk control, and they need to use their hands sometimes for balance. And that's more of our intermediate wheelchair user, right? And we know a prop sitter, they can't sit by themselves. They need a lot more external support. And that's more of our advanced complex wheelchair user. So in the packages, we're working with the basic user and then the intermediate user. So most of the stuff I'm going to do is intermediate and then just a little bit more. Okay. So when we're looking at the posture, again, now we have looked at posture in the wheelchair, the posterior pelvic tilt and the trunk either, rolled forward. We look at the balance and postural support, and then we're going to go to number 3, the MAT assessment. So the important thing in the MAT assessment is we need to know, does a person have the pelvic and hip flexibility to come to the reference neutral sitting posture? Okay, the reference. So if the pelvis is in a posterior tilt, can it come to a neutral tilt? Can it come to a neutral tilt? So the PSIS and the ASIS are at least aligned. Does the hip flexion come to 90 degrees? So that means the trunk to thigh angle is that 90 degrees. We're going to go through each one of these so there's no questions. Does the knee extension, does the knee extend to 90 degrees? So we'll go through each one. So we have the person in the supine position and they're rolled posteriorly, and you can see that that lower spine is going to be curved and flexed. So are they flexible? Can we get that PSIS and that ASIS to be aligned?
Sí.
Are we good? So sometimes we can do it with a strap. Sometimes we do it with our hands. Can we tilt that pelvis so that ASIS and PSIS are aligned and not tilted posteriorly? Or are they fixed that you can't really move it? And this is really important. So if the person can come to that neutral pelvic tilt, we know that we can sit them in 90 degrees or anywhere between 90 and a little bit more open to like 110. So that's going to be, depends on if you have adjustability of that seat to back angle. Is that clear? Tell me if it isn't, I guess. Just check, just talk to me if it isn't. It's easier than for me to see a chat. If that pelvis is pulled into a posterior tilt, it's not going to be comfortable for somebody to sit in a 90-degree angle. They're going to be not contacting except for one place, and it'll be uncomfortable. So what might we do? What might we do? So we want to make sure we're supporting that pelvis. So we could shape, this is all like the shape of the low back. We could shape that low back to accommodate it. And then we might tilt that seating system back a little bit. There's a lot of ways to do that. And we might be able to even just open up that seat to back angle. Is that clear? So now, because this is already fixed, and unless that's going to change, we want to make sure that person is going to be functional with their head upright. Are we good so far? Is there a question? Okay. So now we want to just differentiate between the hip flexion angle. Okay, so in physical therapy, I'm a physical therapist, we always measure these angles. And so the hip flexion angle is this angle if the person has an extended hip and you're bringing it into flexion. So for this particular person, it's going to be less than 90 degrees. It's 75 degrees. The thigh to trunk angle now is going to be more open. It's going to be 105 degrees. Okay. And so we have to make sure that we are clear about these angles, depending on how you document them and how you do those measurements in your clinic. So this is a really important point, because when you're, first of all, let's just look at how we do this. So one person has to be holding on to that pelvis and making sure that pelvis doesn't go into a posterior tilt. And the other person is flexing the hip, and this is the measure here. So when that pelvis starts to go into that posterior tip, this person says, stop, I'm going to measure that hip flexion. If they have that 90 degrees, we know they probably can sit in something at 90 or 100 or 105. So this hip flexion is measuring, this hip flexion angle is going to be measuring the seat to back support angle. Is that clear? We're all good so far? So again, if it's 90, they can sit somewhere between 90 and 100 and 90, 95, 100, 105. You have to try different angles if you have that ability. If that hip flexion angle is less than 90, that means the trunk to thigh angle is greater. So hip flexion is going to be this angle here. That's less than 90. And the trunk to thigh angle now is greater than 90. That's going to have to match that seat to back angle. Okay, the seat to back angle. It's going to need to be a little bit more open than 90. Okay. Okay. So we talked about if that we don't do that, what happens? It's going to be uncomfortable for the person, just like the posterior pelvic tilt. It's going to be uncomfortable to cause that pelvis to go into a posterior tilt if we try to keep that person at 90. The next thing we have to do, the next thing that influences that posterior pelvic tilt is going to be the hamstrings. So we know that these hamstrings go from the bottom of the pelvis at the ischial tuberosities to below that knee joint. So if they pull, they're going to be pulling on that knee. So one person is stabilizing the hip, the other one is flexing the knee. They start to, the knee is flexed, I apologize. They start to extend the knee, and as soon as that pelvis starts to posteriorly tilt, it says, okay, stop extending that knee. So why is it important, you guys, to stabilize the pelvis? Can anybody tell me? Anybody know? Can we just do it without stabilizing the pelvis?
I think, sorry to, if anyone else is going to talk then, I think we need to stabilize the pelvis because the hamstring goes over 2 joints.
Yeah.
So if we didn't stabilize it, it'd be a false reading.
It's a false reading, and what would happen to the pelvis?
It could go off into posterior tilt without us knowing.
Yeah, it could go off into posterior pelvic tilt without anybody knowing. And so then you don't know how the hamstring is going to be influencing the pelvis. Okay, so the hamstrings will pull that pelvis into a posterior tilt. So it's really important while you're doing this measurement that somebody stabilizes that and doesn't allow it to go into a posterior tilt. When it starts to go into that posterior tilt, say, hold on, that's enough. Is that clear for everybody? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we don't have, if all of a sudden, you're trying to extend that knee and this therapist is saying, it's going into posterior tilt, I don't have that much knee extension, what do we need to do? We need to make sure we accommodate for that knee tightness, that knee hamstring tightness, that knee flexion tightness, so that this angle will be less. That means that if somebody's in a wheelchair, they have to have their feet underneath them. Otherwise, that pelvis is going to be slipping into a posterior tilt. So these are the most common things that I still see after many, many years in the United States. So I imagine it's a worldwide issue. Maybe I bet you guys are a little bit better. Okay. So after we do the mat assessment, and I just did the very basic ones for the pelvis and just the hip flexion and the knee extension. There's other ones, but this is where we're doing it now for the posterior pelvic tilt. Now we go into hand simulation. So that's flexibility and postural support in the sitting position. So in the sitting position, you're using, and I like to have two people because usually you require a person to be able to find where that pelvis was limited and support that. And then the other person is, and accommodate any angles that might have been limited in that person's range of motion. And then the other person is helping to support the other parts of the body, particularly for a prop sitter or a more complex involved person. And the goal again is to try to find their neutral posture. So not just like reference neutral, so they are, that they have to sit in this posture, but where do they actually feel relaxed? Do they feel like they can sit there for a while, because they will be sitting there for a while. And, we have all these phones that take pictures now. It's easy. For me, it's a lot easier to take the picture than to draw, but you can also draw from the front and the back to get a good idea, because sometimes you're like, what was that? Like this fellow here on the right, he does better if he's flexed forward a little bit. That is his posture that he relaxes into. If I tried to bring him back further, it wouldn't really work for him. So that's just a little nuance that I feel like really makes it for seating, is really starting to listen with your hands to figure out what is the best, posture for this person and how can we support it well. So when we're doing this hand simulation, if you have a limitation in range of motion, it needs to be accommodated. So that means that if this person lacks hip flexion or has a greater thigh to trunk angle, we need to accommodate that first. So you can have them sit on some kind of a block, or this is a kind of a wedge. If it's just a wedge, they'll slide down. So it has to be like a block underneath to increase that seat to back angle to match it basically. And then you can work with where the support is needed. Is that clear? Like a temporary support? So now we've looked at these through the assessment process. So these are causes of a person sitting in a posterior tilt in a wheelchair seating system. So this is about flexibility, and it is a little bit about tone if somebody has some differences in tonal muscle tone or neurological stuff. So the first thing, if the pelvis is flexible at the spine and hip, sometimes the seat system is inappropriate. You guys know that if they're just in a sling seat and back and the seat depth is too long, or they don't have good support of the pelvis and low back. So we're going to look at this first one to make sure that we're all on the same page. So step one, make sure that they're not in something that's so slung in the seat that's causing that posterior tilt. So they need a firm seat cushion and firmness, or supported in that, and there's different ways to support that backrest so it's not so slung. So that's the first step. And I think that's like basic, everybody knows that one. Also, seat depth. We know what the seat depth needs to be. It needs to be about a half of an inch inside the popliteal fossa. And if it's too long, the pelvis will go into a posterior tilt. And if it's too short, they're not going to have support. So those are all pretty basic reasons from the seating system point of view why somebody would go into a posterior tilt. Now, if somebody's in a posterior tilt and they have, again, this is if they have the flexibility at the spine and at the hip, you want to support at the posterior aspect of the pelvis, in the front of the ischial tuberosities with a pre-ischial shelf, and then over top of the thighs. So it's a 3-point control behind the PSIS in front of the ischial tuberosity and then over top of the thighs. So this is used a lot for people that have some, not just like a tendency to slide forward, but even if they have increased tone and they have that flexibility. So that gets a little bit more into the complex seating, but it's the same principles because it's the biggest problem that we see in seating. So this is a pre-ischial shelf that's underneath the foam, okay, for that postural control. Any questions about that? So there's different pelvic straps or seat belts, however you use those terminology. And one can be at 60 degrees. That's usually my more preferred, depending on what I get with the hand simulation. And sometimes people need a little bit more, like at 45 degrees, and sometimes a little bit less if they can move their pelvis forward over top of their thighs. So like at 90 degrees. So there's different possibilities of pelvic strap angle. So let's go to this next one. If the pelvis is flexible at the spine, but the hip lacks 90 degrees, hip flexion is lacking 90 degrees, and that would mean that the trunk to thigh angle is greater than 90 degrees. So the problem that we see is the seat to back angle does not match the hip flexion angle, or we call it the trunk to thigh angle. So let's just look at that a second. So again, let's say the hip flexion is less than 90 or the trunk to thigh angle is greater. So we need to open up that seat to back support angle. So another way that we can do that, so one way is opening up, if you can do that with your wheelchair or the seating system, opening up that seat to back support angle. And another way is angling down the front of the thighs, either both of them or maybe one hip lacks 90 degrees. So you angle down one, and you can see here, there's a little bit of a pre-ischial shelf. So because if you don't have a pre-ischial shelf and you just angle it down, the person will slide on that slide out of the seat. So either both, this is a side view of both, if somebody has both hips flexions that are limited, or one. So now, is there any questions about that one? So now if we go, yep, go ahead, Ali.
Yes, my question is, for this support, can be like adjusting for wheelchair, like with the folding wheelchair, or we need to change the seat to be like from wood?
I'm not sure I understand your question. So is it like a folding wheelchair, or you need to change the seat?
Exactly. The support for this one will be better when the seat is from fabric or from wood.
So for this one, it's better if the seat base is firm. So the seat base is first firm, and then you have something like the pre-ischial shelf is more of a semi-firm, and then foam over top of it. It's very difficult to do this unless you have a really, depending on what the materials you have to make the seat cushion. If you have something that's very, very firm, you can probably do it with a contour of something firm. Let's say you have, corrugated cardboard. You have layers of corrugated cardboard. That's pretty firm, and you might be able to do that as long as you accommodate underneath that cushion for the sling of the wheelchair seat. Does that make sense? What kind of cushion do you use?
We use foam and soft foam.
And soft foam? And are you seeing are you seeing people that are more intermediate users?
Yes.
Okay. And do you use wood underneath the foam?
The wheelchair that we use is like, it's fabric. The seat is fabric. It can be folding, and we adjust the foam according to this one. But sometimes it's slide. So if we change the seat in the wheelchair to be from wood, That would be good, or
Yep. So what you would do is you would put a wood, like if the wheelchair folds, you would have a seat cushion that you take out that has a wood base underneath it, or something quite firm like wood. Sometimes they use different kinds of plastic. And then,
it's not.
then over top of that, you would have the foam.
Yeah, over that, I mean.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at this one for the pelvises that are fixed at the spine. Oftentimes what happens is that low back support doesn't conform to the spine, or that seat to back angle is too close. So if we look at this again, this is a repeat of what I just did before. If that tilt is fixed like that, you need to shape either that low back or find a way to put straps a little bit behind that that backrest of the wheelchair. And the thing is, if you're looking at this person and they're upright and they're in this angle, they're going to be looking down at the ground. So some way to angle back that whole seating system. Another option, if you have the possibility of opening up the seat to back angle, that's another option, so that person is seen forward. Does that make sense? Just let me know if it doesn't. Okay. Another one is you can open it up by putting in the support behind the low back. Okay, so this increases also that angle between the pelvis and the thigh. So that can be more helpful if you have, if you're stuck with like a 90-90, base here in the base, seat base and the backrest. You can put that support here to increase that angle. So the next one is if you have those tight hamstrings, so this is another big cause of the posterior pelvic tilt, you have to allow those knees to flex underneath to accommodate the hamstrings. So again, we lack 90 here. It's very tight. So even in the sitting position, it's tight. And if we pushed it a little bit more, that pelvis would go into a posterior tilt. So we have to accommodate that by angling back that front and allowing those feet to go underneath the seat base. So before, I have a video to share if I thought it might be helpful for you guys to see a little bit of the process. Are there any questions? This is the basic material that I was going to cover and then just show this video, but I want to see if there's any questions before I share the video.
Question. Do you know any commercially made cushions that have a very good shelf? No, do you know of any commercially made cushions that have a good shelf, like you mentioned, or just handmade cushions?
The pre-ischial shelf.
Yes, the pre-ischial shelf.
Yeah. So what happens, I'm very frustrated in the United States, I just have to say, because we have called it the anti-thrust seat cushion, and everybody has it backwards. They have it as a wedge, and when you have a wedge like that, the pelvis slides. It's like a slide, and instead of, I'm going to go back, and this is what people are. Even if I send it, even if I at least maybe it's in New Mexico where I live, but I have to say I'm very frustrated with. So instead of having this block, you need to have a block. If you don't have a block and you just have like a wedge that goes up like that, the pelvis will just slide. So you're doing the opposite of what you want to do. You need to have a block, and you need to have foam that's really snug to that block. And that really helps to prevent people from sliding forward, as long as they don't have pressure issues. This is more for postural control. So we use this for people that have good sensation. They don't have pressure sores, more like people that have some mild tone issues. So I would say that I don't even when I've tried to do custom made anti-thrust cushions here, I've had to make my own. And I'm really sorry about that. That's, I can't seem to get that past some of the people here. So does anybody else know of any commercially available ones?
No, I have the same thing. I find it very frustrating that I can't find any commercial cushions that do a proper job. And you would think,
Right.
you know, that everyone needs this. Why
We would
isn't it
get
out
it.
there?
And where are you?
I'm in Israel, but most of our cushions are imported from Europe and the States. But
I
I
know.
haven't found.
It's so frustrating. I end up going down to a warehouse and I buy all this polyurethane foam, the Ethafoam, and I remake all the cushions that I see when I see the kids that I see, because it's mostly the kids. And because I I don't know where, you know, and I've given in services to NARTS and everything. And I don't know what the problem is. I'm frustrated with it. Maybe we could join together and see if we can do a little bit more education. But I'm in the same boat as you. Yeah. It's a problem of understanding of what's needed. I think this being in the World Health Organization intermediate package is clearer than what people are understanding, honestly, in the United States. I'm just going to tell you. So I feel like the rest of the world is going to help the United States. That's my bottom line. So are there any other questions? Would you like to see a little video? I'll go ahead and I'll show. This is a young man that that I was seeing, and his parents just asked to do an assessment. And so I'll show you a little bit of it, and maybe it'll help with some of the programs. So can you hear it okay?
I'm just going to check how your position of your hips are and stuff like that. And then we're going to get you out of the chair. Okay. So when I feel that the ASIS and the PSIS, he's posteriorly rotated. So he's in a posterior and the right side is a little bit further rotated back than the left side. So it's back more on this side and that side. So I just know that. And I see that you're a little rounded forward, but it's not too much. I see that your legs are just abducted a little bit to the side, and your knees are a little bit in extension. When we look at you, pal, from the side, now is this the angle he usually is at, or just a little bit further back?
Pretty much it right there.
Is that it? Okay. So you don't tilt him back typically?
Little bit.
Nah, sometimes,
Yes.
not very often.
Yes.
Okay. So what I notice is that, again, the pelvis is tilted back into a posterior tilt, and he's rounded forward a little bit. And when it looks like, Edgar, you know, it looks like your headrest is quite far back from where you are in where you like to rest your head. You know, to get to it, you have to go back quite far. Is that right? Yep. And it seems like sometimes you can hold your head up pretty well, but probably sometimes you just get tired and you have to flop it back. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. That's what I'm, dear love. Mr. Burley slick cover. What's that?
If he don't have this support, he have the belt over here.
Yeah. So if he doesn't have the support, the belt goes all the way out. Yeah. So what I want to do is we're going to get out and see. I see that you extend your legs and you flex them a little bit.
So I just want to say that I don't know if you understood all that, but he basically is held in by those groin straps and he slides down quite a bit and he's not very comfortable. So we're trying to figure out if that's the optimal for him. So now we're going to check his joint and muscular flexibility just at the pelvis and the hips and knees.
So I have my thumb on the ASIS and my finger pads on the PSIS. And I feel, Edgar, that your pelvis is pulled back into a posterior tilt. So I wanted to see if you have that spinal mobility first. See if we have some motion there. And it's kind of tight. There's not a lot of motion there. It's a little bit, but not so much. And so I also see, Pal, that this pelvis is a little bit more posterior. So I just want to see. Now that one I can move. I can move that forward so it's more in the neutral position. Okay. And then we're just going to see. It's not really, there's not much of a problem with that. No, with the lateral. So I know you have, is that all right? You have 90 there. We're not going further than that. Is it painful? No. Oh, you're going to show me. Hey, Pal, listen. Can Jean Ann just do this? You know that I'm pretty okay with my hands doing this. Just make sure that it feels okay. That feel okay? Okay. Now I'm just going to bring your hip in and out, because what I want to see is if it can get to 90 degrees, so so we know that we can actually sit up on your sit bones when you're sitting. Okay. So your right hip comes to neutral. It's just fine. Let's just check your left one. Okay, Pal? You okay there? This one is a little tight, huh? This one's a little tight. Let me just see. So it comes to 90. Yeah, it comes to neutral. I'm not so worried about that. Can I check one more thing? Or and then we'll be finished with this part, I promise, all right? Yeah, I'm just gonna hold your leg. It starts to go about right there. Yeah, so it doesn't really come to 90. It's about 10 degrees off. Okay. We're gonna do this side. Okay. Right there. Yeah, it's a little tight back there, mister. Yeah, so the hamstrings are tight. So what I know now that if we don't allow those legs to go underneath, that it would pull his pelvis forward, because these muscles go all the way underneath and attach to those sit bones. So he's about 80 degrees here and about 75 degrees here. Yeah. Of the extension with the hip at 90. Yeah. And we can check your ankles, but I know that you're in orthotics. They're a little tight too.
We don't put them on very often because they've been bothering.
They've been bothering you.
Only when he's either in the walker, the stander, or on his bikes.
Not on his bike.
Not on his bike? Oh,
The
no.
left one feels a little bit tighter. Is that okay, Edgar? We're just going to see if it's okay. And if it's too hard to move your hip any further forward like that, okay, because you have to tell us with your body. Remember, we read your body. We listen to your body and we listen to you. Not going to do anything that doesn't feel okay. All right. So he can come up a little bit more than he was like. How does that feel, babe? So that's pushing. I think maybe let him go back just a little bit into his chair. Now what I'm going to see is I'm going to let him flex a little bit more. Yeah, and I think that's the key, is letting those knees flex underneath him, because his hamstrings are so tight that, I think it's it's making his whole pelvis slide like a slide down the hill. And I think if he's more upright, and we let those legs go back underneath, because those muscles actually attach right underneath these sit bones. They go all the way down. They attach to the back of the lower leg bones. So they go over two joints. So if this part extends, the knee extends, it pulls the whole pelvis like that.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's one of the problems. Is that right? Yeah, he knows. Right, so he's in more flexion. Okay, is that better? What do you think? What does that feel like right here, Edgar? Let me reposition his feet a little bit. I'm going to move your feet a little bit, Edgar. Do you feel like you're having to give him a lot of support in the back? It has to be solid. Solid support. Okay, and you're right at the back of the pelvis? Mm-hmm. Okay, and I feel like I'm giving him not that much support in the back, and it's not too high. Like I don't feel like he needs it. I'm not giving him anything for his head right now. But it doesn't mean that he doesn't, need that for resting. But you can come in against my shoulder. You're so tall. How am I going to do this? How's that? Let's try that. I'm going to, like right there. You know, so it's interesting. So being more upright, you're actually more engaged with the world. There's a lot more you can do. Like in terms of, you know, learning, eating, digesting, seeing the world. So that's the benefit of being a little bit more upright. You can also maintain a good posture and have the whole, you know, what I'm thinking of is how's it going to translate to the chair? And you can have the whole thing tilted back so you don't have to be upright all the time, so you can rest too. But it's a little bit different than like a recliner chair to watch the television or something, you know, because that he would be flipping forward and sliding forward. So you want to take a little break and go and lie down for a bit? No? Okay, so what we're getting right now is he needs some support from the back. It doesn't even seem right now that he's going to need that much support. I don't know if he's going to need like an anti-thrust. I don't think so. I don't really get that he does. I feel like if we keep his pelvis supported from the back and support his so he can actually come forward. Like he just hasn't had this experience of being able to bring his pelvis. Like you guys tried in your chair, like sitting upright and, you know, coming forward. Yeah.
Leaning forward?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through this as a summary. So when he came in, it was the reasons for the seating assessment was to prevent him sliding forward, being more comfortable, allowing trunk movement, being able to eat with the family, and also to support his posture so he could use communication device and computer. And we saw that his trunk was flexed and his pelvis was in a posterior tilt. And that seat to lower backrest angle was about 100 degrees. So it was a little bit more open. The big things in terms of flexibility is that he had somewhat of a fixed pelvis posterior tilt, but it was a little like 25% flexible and a little bit more in the sitting position. The big thing was he had tight hamstrings. So the right knee particularly was tighter. It lacked 50 degrees of extension, and it caused the pelvis to posteriorly tilt. So when we're looking at a system for him, we were trying to figure out where he is comfortable in the upright position with what kind of support. And we found out that he didn't need that much support. He needed some support behind his pelvis. He needed his knees to be flexed underneath his seat, and he needed some support for his thorax. And then during, having some time that the whole system can be tilted back. So we did some material simulation after that, and then, we changed out his belt and where his feet were in regards to the seat cushion, that they were flexed underneath. The seat belt was over top of his thighs instead of at his groin. The seat cushion was firmer, and the seat to back at rest angle was brought up a little bit more.
You can actually move.
So this is what we came up with, is just a very mild, we call anti-thrust, or a pre-ischial shelf, and backrest with just a little bit of support at the sacrum, and the knees were going to flex underneath the seat base, and then having a 4-point seat belt with the main pull at 90 degrees and just opening up that seat to backrest angle a little bit. So that's what, I don't know if that helps at all, but just in summary, when we look at, again, solutions for the person now sitting in a posterior tilt, if the pelvis is flexible and the hip is flexible to 90, you want to make sure they have a firm seat and backrest to begin. If they need more support behind the pelvis, in front of the ischial tuberosities and a pre-ischial shelf, and over top of the thighs. If the pelvis is flexible at the spine, but the hip lacks flexion, the big thing is open up the seat to back angle. You got to match that seat to back angle with that hip flexion or trunk to thigh angle. If that pelvis is fixed at the spine, shaping the lower back rest angle and opening up the seat to back angle. And then for tight hamstrings, allowing those knees to flex underneath the seat base to accommodate that lack of knee extension. So that's what I have, and feel free to write down my email address and that's my website. If you're, if you need to problem solve anything, I'm happy to throw some things back and forth with you. So I think I will stop the share and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Jean. That was an excellent presentation, and it was surely very informative. Thank you so much for your time. I'm just going to open the floor for any questions from our participants today. Please feel free to unmute and speak up, or you can also use the chat feature. Thank you.
Hi, Sudhakar here.
Go ahead, Sudhakar.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for that. I have one thing, like in one of the pictures I was just seeing there was a wedge placed, which was the from the back to front, the downward slope was there. So is that used for only assessment purpose as a temporary support, or that is a solution for the open seat to backrest angle, increased open seat to backrest angle?
I think I might go put my PowerPoint back on and make sure I'm clear with what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
This is just for my understanding.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about, I think. You're this one?
I'm not able to see.
Oh, it's not, wait a second. Did it not come up?
Not yet.
Okay, wait. Let me go back. Sorry, I did it wrong.
Yeah, it's coming now. Yeah. Can you just go up a bit?
Is it this one?
No, not this, not this. Go up. The picture from the book, actually.
And tell me again it was a seat to back angle?
It was on the chair. It was on the chair when
This one?
no, go back.
Just ask your question again. Maybe I'll get what you're asking. I thought it was.
See, there was a wedge, just a plain wedge. Backside it was raised at the
A plain
backrest.
bench? A bench?
And the front it was, yeah, in the bench, yes.
Okay.
And in the front it is sloped down.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. It was this one.
Yes, just next one. Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
So is this, yeah. So here the trunk to triangle is more. And is this to continue the assessment we place and continue the assessment, or this is the final solution?
I have to say with this, it's more for the assessment. We used to use this kind of like, as long as you have some place for, making sure that ischial tuberosity is not sliding down. We used to use this a lot for temporary solutions for little ones who are hypotonic and like in the home for short periods of time, or in the classroom to help with their trunk control, but found out that it's too much for them to stay there for a long time. So the preference is, my preference would be on that one. I'm going to go back to go more to this, so that you have their ischial tuberosities are behind this, so they don't slide down, and that's just going to be accommodating the hip flexion.
Yeah, it's for one side open seat to backrest angle. Am I right?
That's one side. It's the one side if there's a hip flexion difference. Let's say this hip is able to get to 90, but this one doesn't get to 90. So the trunk to thigh angle is more than 90, greater than 90. The hip flexion angle is less than 90. But it could be that both sides are also not coming up to 90. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. I was just having that.
That question. Yeah.
Yeah. Just clear. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sudhakar. Does anybody have any other questions? Please feel free to unmute and speak up, or you can type your questions in the chat. Okay, looks like we don't have other questions.
I'd love to see anybody else's face. Anybody else? Yeah, nice to see everybody. If you have any questions, feel free to, I'll email me. I'll put my thank you. Hi. It's nice to see everybody. Thank you. You can feel free to email me. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. I will follow up with the meeting recording and also include Jean Ann's email address if you'd like to contact her. Thank you so much for your time today, Jean Ann. We really, really appreciate it. And we cannot thank you enough for your excellent presentation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for everybody doing such good work in the world. That makes me very, very happy.
Thank you for having you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Thanks, Krithika.